You are listening to Global Skeptic Roundtable, Episode 1 on Thursday, the 11th of June, 2015. I'm your host, John LeBon, and I'm joined on the panel by an all-star cast of Global Skeptics. So I'll introduce you to them one by one right now. First of all, we've got David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. David, thanks for joining us. And he's got himself on mute, so we'll come back to him in a moment. We've also got...
There you are. There you are. I couldn't hear you over the music, John.
All right, well, it's good to have you with us, Dave. How have you been, mate? He's back on mute. All right, so we've got Matrix Decode coming to us live from Spain. Matrix, glad you could make it out.
Hey, John. Good to be chatting with you again. Looking forward to the show.
And look, as much as I love Dave and Matrix Decode, we do have someone with us on the panel who is perhaps the biggest Globe Earth skeptic in the room. That is, of course, allegedly Dave, a.k.a. DMurphy25, a.k.a. Dave. Dave, take yourself off mute and say hello to the audience.
Hello, everyone. It's Dave.
Oh, beautiful stuff, mate. Like a natural, a fish to water. So what the plan is for tonight, guys, we're going to spend about 2 hours, give or take, just going over the Globe Earth Skeptic. It's almost like a new movement that's swept across the internet. And the hope is that between the four of us, we can look at the arguments for and against the Globe Earth model and for the Flat Earth model and NASA and media fakery and all the things that are related. And hopefully after 2 hours, those people who are new to this have got an idea of where people like us are coming from. People who are familiar with it might have learned some new things. And then the old hands in the Flat Earth or the Globe Earth movements, hopefully they enjoy it as well. It's going to be a 2 hour show. We'll be taking questions from the live audience. We've already got more than 20 people watching live right now, so we plan to have plenty of fun, plenty of feedback with the live chat. But the first thing that we've been wanting to do is to throw to Dave straight away. Dave, you've put together two videos, about 45 minutes each, dealing with the big lie. So you've essentially put together a feature-length film all about the Flat Earth. So we thought, while we're lucky enough to have you with us on episode 1, we'd give you the floor right from the start. So do you want to give the audience a basic idea of who you are, how you came to put together a feature-length documentary about the Flat Earth, and everything to do with all of that?
Right. Well, I'm just an ordinary person. I've just, I've been a bit of a truth seeker since around about 2005. Started looking into various topics, and I accidentally come across the Flat Earth. I was researching something completely unrelated, and I clicked on the wrong video, or it turns out it was the right video, and I discovered it was a Flat Earth video, and I was about to turn it off when it said something that caught my attention. And as it happens, it was the old Bedford Levels experiment, which is about a guy putting a telescope on a long sort of straight canal, and watching a boat go sort of 6 miles down the canal, and being able to see the boat at the end. And I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. I started watching that video and all the other videos that I could find. But at the time, this was about 6 months ago, there wasn't an awful lot of Flat Earth material out there. So I started talking to a few people about it, and the usual response was, I was crazy, and I was a bit of an idiot for thinking that way. So I kept it a bit quiet. But all for the last 6 months, I've just been collecting data and doing little experiments and putting all this together. And eventually, I got to the point where, the point I'm at now is that I don't necessarily completely believe that it's a flat Earth. I don't know enough to say without a doubt that it's a flat Earth. But I do know, absolutely do know, that we're not clinging to the surface of a ball. That's where I'm at. There are a couple of things that that still are unknowns for me, and we'll probably get into that later on. But I had enough that I could put together a video, and I ignored a lot of the stuff that I could have looked at. There's tons of stuff I could have looked at in the video, but I confined it to things that anybody in the street would be able to look at and go, So I just pulled out a few things, and you know what? There's a lot I could have looked at. But and originally I was going to put it all together in one video, which is, as you say, is almost like a feature-length film. And it turned out it was going to take me around about 2 days to upload, so I ended up having to break it up into 2 parts. But I've got quite an interesting reaction from it, mostly positive actually. But yeah, there's certainly your usual trolls that have appeared.
John?
Hello?
I think we lost John for a second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Dave, I really enjoyed your videos. I thought they were really well thought out, good analysis, and the presentation was excellent. And you covered so many different aspects, touching on various issues like NASA and so on, as well as the flat Earth. And I think all these things kind of come together and are connected. Part of the big picture.
Well,
and,
obviously.
Excellent.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, obviously, NASA is a big part of it, because if this was as they say it is in the books, and what we've all learned, if it is a ball Earth and there is space and all this sort of things, then NASA has no reason to lie about anything. They might lie about going to the moon, but just going a couple of 100 miles up into space, why would they lie about that? But literally everything you look at as far as NASA's concerned is a lie, and that plays into it, because they've got to be lying about something.
I have a picture that I put together yesterday I want to share with everybody from NASA. It's on their website, and supposedly it's a picture from above the space shuttle flying over a gulf somewhere, and the space shuttle orbits at 200 to 240 miles. We know it's in orbit because, can you guys see my screen? We know it's in orbit because the pod doors are open, so that wouldn't be happening while it's flying or descending. And if you look at the land below, can you guys see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at the land below and look at the the land features, like I look at this little patch right here, if you can see my mouse, it's the same size as 57 miles above, according to Google Earth. Now, again, when I first looked at this, I'm like, well, anyone could take any picture and just blow it up to match the sizes. So then I went on Google Earth and I drew a measurement, a 10-mile line, which is this little mile here, this little yellow line, at 200 miles and again at 57 miles, to prove that this picture that NASA gives us is really just a photoshopped image of the space shuttle from a high-flying, low orbit, if you call 57 miles low orbit, craft, and that it is not shot from space. What do you think about that?
I completely agree with you. It's fake. I've got a picture I can show as well, if you like.
Sure.
And I mentioned it in the video as well. Let's see if I can do this sharing bit. Here we go. Here we go. Can you see that?
Not yet. Did you hit start share? There it is.
Yep. So again, just like you said, this is a picture of the space shuttle with its doors open, with the cargo bay doors open. So it has to be supposedly in space. Now, if you look, and I don't know if the resolution is good on that end, but if you look at the background, you can see amazing amounts of features on the background. I can see on the ground. I can see rivers. I can see fields. I can see. I can almost see individual houses if I looked really hard. Now, you would be hard pressed to see that sort of detail from 35,000 feet. Looking down from a plane. Yeah, this is not 300 miles up in space. This is literally at aircraft level. So
Yeah.
again, you look at pictures like this and just accept them because your worldview says, well, that's in space. But when you actually drop the programming and just look at the thing, it becomes obvious that it's fake. So I better stop this now.
Yeah, the question is, if the Earth was a sphere, a spinning sphere, like they say, and the physics is as they say it is, why are they faking all this stuff? What's so difficult about putting something up in space, in low Earth orbit, and and going into space? But I mean, they seem to be faking all of it. I mean, the big question is why? I mean,
I want to jump back just a little bit because we kind of just jumped right into this. For anybody here that's coming across this video live or when it's recorded, that when you first hear about the flat Earth, you discount it. I banned people from my Facebook pages that were posting flat Earth stuff and refused to even look at it because it's absurd. We are taught from kindergarten and before. They put globes in our hands, and we're taught that the Earth is round, and that really limits our ability to want to explore because we're on a round Earth and it doesn't go anywhere. And the thing that got me first was everybody thinks that when they go up in a plane that they think they see the Earth curving, but they don't. They're seeing a circular flat plane because you can only see the same distance in every direction that you look. If you look over to the left at 9 o'clock, you can see 100 miles or whatever the distance is. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, you connect all of those maximum ranges of your distance, and it's creating an arc on a flat surface, and our minds are telling us, oh, it must be wrapping around a ball because that's what we were taught. But the horizon rises to eye level on a flat plane. And here's a simple video that most of us have seen, but anyone that's new, I want to share this with you. What happens when you rise up above a ball versus a flat plane? So on the left, we have a ball, and on the right, we have a flat plane. And what we observe on mountains, on hills, in airplanes, in balloons, is the horizon always remains at eye level. And that's what you see. The higher you go, the farther you can see, but it's still at eye level to the point where you just can't see any farther because of pollution, because of, fog and smog and everything else that's floating in the air. You can only see so far, but it's a flat plane. Our senses are showing us that it's a flat plane, but we're being told that it's a ball, and we ignore that.
Well, can you guys hear me again now?
We can hear you now, John.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped out for a moment there. So basically, so far we've looked at the fake NASA pic, and now we're looking at the horizon rising to eye level. There's probably 10 or 20 major arguments that we could go through to explain why some of us might believe the Earth is flat. I guess over the next hour or so, our plan is to go through some of our favourite ones. So since we've already got the ball rolling, you there, Dirth, why don't you elaborate on this horizon one? And then what I'll do is read out to you some of the counter-arguments in the live chat. How's that sound?
That's great. I want to share another picture with you, and I want to talk about the horizon. So this is a picture of Chicago across Lake Michigan. It's 59 miles away, and if that's true, which it is, and the calculations, if the Earth is the size they say it is, and you can measure that distance. Measure the curve of the Earth is the miles squared times 8 inches. So that would put the Chicago skyline 2,320 feet below the horizon. So we're looking at the horizon. It looks like maybe the bottoms of the buildings are obscured a little bit, but in reality, we shouldn't even be able to see the tops of the buildings. And the way the mainstream media explains this is a superior mirage, but it's not. It's a clear picture of Chicago. You can't see the mountains behind it because of smog and fog and everything else. It's in the right orientation. It's not reversed. There's another video that people put out there that show a horizon like this, and you can only see half of the buildings, but it's during a storm. And if you know anything about storm surges, water surges, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, it could have a surge in it. Like I live on the Long Island Sound, and every day it surges, different number of feet during the tidal flows. The only time you get a flat surface is when it's completely calm and when the tide is slack, at the moment of high tide or the moment of low tide, just when it starts changing direction. Because you have to imagine the horizon. If you've taken an art class or just studied the vanishing point, as things get farther away from you, things in the sky are lower and the ground raises up according to your perception. It's not really rising up. It's just your perspective as it reaches the vanishing point. So just imagine that you have a string, you put a string between your eyes and you connect it to any object. Let's connect it to the sun. And it's noon and it's pretty much going straight up in the air. As the sun goes away, staying at the same altitude, don't imagine it going over a round ball like we're indoctrinated. As it goes farther and farther away, the angle of that string is going to get lower and lower and lower. And as it goes farther away, it's almost getting parallel with the ground from your perspective. And as it does, everything that is an inch over your eye level will block the sun. So people say that's the biggest argument. If the earth is flat, how can it be dark and light at the same time? And my answer is, at the farther it goes away, the more things it has blocking it. It has trees, houses, hills, everything, mountains, and it blocks the sun. And it gets to the point where you're in total darkness. Now, if you could stick something high enough up in the sky, it'll be able to see the sun. But I don't know how high that is. Maybe that's what we're seeing when we see what we think are satellites and the International Space Station. I know there's a good argument that they're so small, how would you see them? And they're not real, nothing's in space. But let's just assume satellites and the International Space Station are real, and they are reflective and large enough to reflect the sun as we are told. That only makes sense on a flat Earth model, where the sun is on a flat surface and these are high enough reflecting the sun down on us. If it was a ball Earth, they are relatively close to the Earth, and at midnight you would not be able to see the space station, which I have seen orbit from horizon to horizon. It would be in the shadow of the Earth. It would be eclipsed by the Earth every single time without exception, and you would not be able to see any reflected light off of it. So,
all right, what I'll do, mate, is I'll just pause you there. So far we've touched on the fake NASA pic, the horizon at eye level, rising to eye level, Chicago, the lack of curvature. That's three distinct arguments for the flat Earth. Now you're talking about the sun's rotation and the ISS, which are, I guess, two objections to the flat Earth. So we've already briefly touched on 5 topics. What I'm hoping we can do tonight is go into some of these topics in some depth. So what I'll do is I've written down your favorite topics so far. Why don't we throw to Matrix, see what his topics are, and then once we've got a bit of a short list, then we'll start looking at some of these topics in further detail, because in the live chat, they're already starting to throw some objections to your arguments out. So I think it's best if we stick to a few topics for a few minutes and really give them some proper time. But before we do that, we better throw to Matrix. Matrix, apart from the 4 or 5 topics that have come up so far, are there any particular arguments for or against the globe Earth that you want to discuss tonight?
Yeah, well, I agree with the topics that have been, the aspects that have been brought up so far, like the no curvature being observed. That's a really big and important one for me. Now, there's so many different aspects to the flat Earth. I mean, we're having to undo all of science, so there's so many things to deal with. Other things, like I think for something for me, like the seasons seem to only really work on a flat Earth model. If the sun is 93 million miles away and bathing the Earth in its sunlight, now how are seasons really created on a globe model? It's much better explained on the flat Earth, and I think many aspects of this and mysteries are better explained on a flat Earth. I think this subject brings into question what we're actually seeing in the sky. What is the sky? What is the moon? What is the sun? How far are they away? A lot of a lot of this evidence is about looking at the proofs of the sphere, and when you look at those proofs, they appear to be false proofs. Like the top 10 reasons the Earth is a sphere, can be easily debunked. So I think it's a case of looking at evidence that is pro flat Earth, and looking at the evidence and a case of questioning and debunking the proofs of it being a sphere Earth. So
yeah, very well said. Well, I tell you what, I think a lot of people, when they're first hearing this, they're still in the mindset of, but everyone knows it's a sphere. We know that because of NASA, and we know because of school. I think it might be best if we start off by, I guess, debunking some of the common myths about the ball being a sphere. And I think Dave's video, allegedly, Dave, your 90-minute presentation did that well, especially when it came to debunking NASA. So do you want to spend a couple of minutes now, for someone who's fresh to all of this, the main reasons why you think NASA are spouting baloney?
Oh, main reasons I think NASA are lying. Well, first of all, looking into the history of NASA, that it was formed by Nazi scientists that were liberated out of Germany at the end of World War II, and we all know that their creed, as far as propaganda is concerned, is make it a big lie and keep repeating it, and everyone will believe it. Now, the point when I started looking at NASA is that everything I looked at that they produced had faults with them. Obviously the moon landing, that's a whole show in itself. But when you look at the space shuttle, everything about it doesn't look real. For instance, the trajectory. When you look at the space shuttle and anything that's supposedly launched into space, if you follow the trajectory, you see, and there's lots of pictures of, I guess, long exposure pictures that show the rocket trail, and you see the actual trajectory is actually looks like it's dishing into the sea. It looks like it's going out of sight and literally dishing into the sea rather than going into space. Now, there's just so much, I don't know where to start, to be honest. I started looking at how the shuttle, the flight parameters of the shuttle, and there are a few anomalies there as well. There's a sequence called main engine cutoff, where they turn off all the rocket engines and the shuttle coasts, basically. And right after main engine cutoff, they release the external tank. Now the external tank, when it's released, falls back to Earth, and there's a few minutes before they actually use something called the orbital maneuvering system, and then supposedly blast the shuttle further off into orbit. But the point is, when they release the external tank, it still falls back to Earth under so-called gravity, so they're not in space. So, because the shuttle's unpowered, why is it going? Is it still coasting at the same altitude? Why isn't it falling back to Earth the same way as the external tank is? It doesn't make any sense. So it looks like, and then I looked at the shuttle landings, and every shuttle landing I saw, I could hear jet engines. and just do it yourself. Go and look on YouTube at all the shuttle landings. First of all, there are no cameras very, very close to the runway. They're all sort of about half a mile away, but you can hear jet engines. The noise of it is so loud. So again, looking at going on the premise that the shuttle has jet engines, I took a close look at the shuttle, and on the back of the shuttle there are these two pods supposedly called the orbital maneuvering system. But there's this really odd-looking detail on the front of these pods. So it's like a kind of slit going into a little round kind of detail. Now it's supposedly made up of tiles. It's a very strange kind of detail to put in such an odd place. But if you think of it as a jet engine, well, if you wanted to hide air intakes, well, a slit and a small hole would do it as an air intake, using something called the Coanda effect, which is the feature that air clings to a rounded surface. That would get enough air into a small intake, enough to power a small jet engine. So literally, that thing you see landing isn't the same thing that goes up on the back of those two rockets, the booster rockets. Obviously, if that was an air intake, that the air would literally rip those two pods off. So there's so much about it. I mean, I could do a whole 2-hour video about the shuttle on its own.
So to summarize, Dave, one of your objections is the space shuttle, which if people can imagine in their mind, you've got the black and white shuttle, it has the big external tank and then the two boosters. While the rocket's going up, we see the two boosters come off, and then as the space shuttle allegedly gets into space, that's when it drops the external tank, and we're supposed to believe that the external tank is affected by gravity when the space shuttle isn't. That's your first objection. And then the second one is that this space shuttle is supposed to be a glider. So what happens is the rockets get it into space, but then it becomes a glider on its way back in. And what you're saying is that, based on the footage that you've seen, you don't think that the space shuttles that return to Earth are gliders at all. You think they're actually powered jet planes that are just rigged up to look like they're gliders, but essentially they're kept on Earth until it's time for the glider to return, but it's not returning, it's just a space shuttle that's a jet engine that's been rigged up to look like it's returning. Is that a basic summary of where you're coming from?
Yes, it is. These people have got a budget of tens of billions of dollars, and for that amount of money, yes, you can fake anything, and there's no reason. If you've got that much money, there's no reason to fake anything.
Yeah, well, I'll throw to you there, deep inside the rabbit hole. I see that you've been in the live chat. We've got more than 40 people watching live. I promise we'll come to all of their objections to all of this later on in the show. But for the time being, we're just going to focus on debunking NASA. Dirk, do you have anything to add to this space shuttle argument?
Yeah, so the whole gravity, keeping everything level, the reason pilots don't fly into space is, flying at 500 miles an hour, they'd have to descend at an incredible rate to stay over the Earth. But the argument that the ball Earth says is that we're all locked in and gravity. So the Earth at the equator is spinning at about 1,100 miles an hour. If you go up into the high atmosphere, that spin, if the atmosphere is spinning with the Earth, is probably 10 or 20 times that, 20,000 miles an hour to maintain a geosynchronous orbit, with the Earth. So if the space shuttle is gliding back into the atmosphere from space, it's going to hit a tailwind or a headwind of speeds that would rip it to shreds, and that just doesn't happen. What do you think about that, Dave? Everybody's muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are so many things wrong with the space shuttle, and literally so many things wrong with everything NASA has done. It's just incredible.
What's amazing is, you come across an objection like that. There really isn't an explanation with the round ball theory, and then people just dismiss it and try to find another objection, which is mind-boggling. The earlier when we talked about the horizon, I could see a bridge that's 35 miles away from my beach, and I could see almost the bottom of the bridge, and the reason I can't see some of it is because of the bulge in the water from the tides and the waves, but I shouldn't be able to see the top of that bridge. The only explanation on a ball Earth is that light bends around the horizon, which, there's no proof of that anywhere.
Well, Dirk, I know that you're very keen to talk about the curvature. I promise we'll do that one next. I want to focus on this debunking NASA to start off with. We're looking at the space shuttle, and so far we've had, allegedly, Dave point out that, A, the space shuttle should be affected by the same gravity as the external tank, and the footage shows that it clearly isn't. And then there's another aspect. I remember when I was a kid, I used to wonder, how come the rockets start off going straight up, but then they start to curve like a parabola? And I was just told, well, once it gets out of view, it shoots off into space and away it goes. But looking at it now, you can see it'd be very easy for them to, once it's out of view, simply keep the rocket going on its parabola into the ocean and be destroyed. And how would we know the difference? And that's the point that I make to people. If they still want to believe in NASA, I say, well, if you were NASA and you were getting $18 billion a year, and it was infinitely cheaper to shoot a rocket up into the sky, have it crash, no one knows the difference, and then spend the rest of the money on whatever you want, what would you do? And if you're an honest person, you'd say, oh, I would spend the money to go to the moon. Even if you think that's possible, we can discuss the possibilities of that later on. But even if you think it's possible to go to space, why would you trust a government agency getting $18 billion if you're going to just accept the video footage of a rocket going half of a parabola and just assume that after the cameras stop rolling, that space shuttle keeps going into space? David, can you remember when you first started questioning NASA's story?
Oh, I don't know when I first started questioning. I mean, I always looked at the moon landings with suspicion. But I'd just like to add something to that. Now, my contention is that the space shuttle is an empty shell that goes up and is destroyed with the external tank, as it dishes into the ocean. Now, the smoking gun, as far as I'm concerned, is, and I'm going to share a picture here. If you'd bear with me one moment. I'll share a picture.
While allegedly Dave's getting his picture ready, we should point out this is your first time in a Google Hangout, so we'll ask for listeners' forgiveness in advance while you get this sorted out. It took me about a dozen uses of Google Hangout to work out screen share, so the fact that you've got the hang this quickly, you're learning a lot quicker than I did.
Thanks a lot. Well, this is the smoking gun as far as I'm concerned. The Challenger disaster back in, I think it's 1986. I can't remember what year. But, the Challenger exploded something like 54 seconds after takeoff. And all 7 astronauts inside were killed. But yet, 30 years later, we find that these astronauts are all alive and well. And most of them haven't changed their name. 2 of them, I don't know if my mouse pointer is showing up on this, probably not, but 2 of them claim to be their identical twin brothers. That's Ellison Onizuka and Carl McNair. 2 of the others, there's Judith Resnick, who hasn't changed her name, Michael Smith, who hasn't changed his name, and Krista McAuliffe, who's using her original name, which is Sharon McAuliffe. So, obviously they weren't on board. So what's to say that any of these so-called astronauts are on board the space shuttle?
And I guess some point that we'd add to that is if NASA could get away with having alleged astronauts die who are perfectly fine to the point where they don't even bother changing their names, or they use ridiculous stories like they're the identical twin relative, if they could get away with that, then they could get away with anything, couldn't they?
Absolutely. And somebody asked me, why are they left? Why are they still alive then? If NASA was really wanted to keep the secret, they'd kill them off. But who would volunteer to go up into space afterwards, knowing that if anything goes wrong, you'd be wiped out?
Well, I've got a question for you. It's a little bit tangential. Have you seen the film, Dave, Capricorn 1, 1977?
Absolutely. I've seen that a few times. I'm surprised that film ever got made because, it kind of blows it all wide open, doesn't it?
Well, for those who aren't aware, Capricorn 1 was made 5 years after the final moon landing. Because the moon landings were 69 to 72. Capricorn 1 was released 77, so 5 years later. And the plot line is that NASA decided to fake a Mars landing because they need the funding, but they can't actually get men to Mars. So the next best thing is to pretend that they're sending men to Mars. And in the plot line of Capricorn 1 is that the astronauts don't know until the last minute, and then they're pulled from the space shuttle and they're told, listen, now it's going to be your job to act. they go along with the act, and I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen it, but this was a film that was made 5 years after the moon landings, and essentially the first hour of Capricorn 1 is telling us exactly how NASA could get away with this. And if it is true that those astronauts from Challenger are still alive, still using their real names or their identical twins' names, if NASA could get away with that, and you still want to deny that NASA are capable of pulling off this kind of hoax, then you're simply refusing to analyze things objectively. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what, Matrix has been pretty quiet there. I promise we'll move on from debunking NASA soon, but I think it's important that we do spend time on the NASA aspect of this, because for most people out there who haven't looked into any of this, the first response they're going to come back with is, well, we know that the Earth is a globe or a ball because NASA have been to other balls. They've shown us photos of balls. You know, we can trust NASA. If the Earth wasn't a ball, NASA would tell us. A lot of their belief is based on the authority of NASA. So it's important to show people NASA's not your friends. NASA aren't honest. In fact, NASA are taking $18 billion a year to show you photos that are utterly ridiculous. Matrix, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, thanks. One thing about, you mentioned Capricorn 1 that I've discovered recently. People who've seen the film, right? The lead astronaut in the movie, alleged astronaut, gives a cryptic message to his wife to hint that he's not actually in space or on Mars. And the clue is that he's, he references a place that they visited. And the place that they visited in last year or whatever in the movie, it's called Flat Rock. Yeah. So I think they're actually hinting at flat Earth in that movie itself by that. It's a very interesting inclusion, and the fact that they use that, that place, something called a flat rock.
And not only that, Matrix, because I saw Capricorn 1 for the first time just a week ago, okay? I knew the basic idea of the film, but I hadn't actually watched it till a week ago. There's a scene where they land, they're in a TV set, but they pretend they're landing on Mars and taking the first step on Mars. They frame that scene almost identical to the first scene of Armstrong walking on the moon. Now, if you think that's a coincidence, then you're praying for coincidences. They didn't do that by coincidence. They couldn't be saying any more allegorically, this is how the moon landings were done. And I was watching the film Capricorn 1 with a couple of people who aren't into alternative theories, if you like, and I said to them, hey, see how this is exactly how the moon landings were shot? Do you think that's a coincidence? And they got that glossed over look in their eyes. They want to believe it's a coincidence, because to believe otherwise means to undo their entire worldview. And who wants to undo their worldview, Matrix?
Yeah, it's a problem for a lot of people, being able to open their minds to the possibility. I mean, for me, when I've looked at the NASA, the moon landing footage and the hoaxery and the fakery, and for several years, and never put two and two together until the flat Earth thing came along. And then it all starts to make sense. And then you just start looking at other things like the International Space Station, and all the footage that they put out from there, and it's just laughable when you look at it. It's CGI. Same with we can talk more about the ISS and things like the Hubble telescope and their fake images. They're magnificent images of distant galaxies and so on, but they can't turn the camera around and take a picture of the moon or the Earth. So I lost my train of thought there.
Well, it's something that blew me away when it comes to NASA when I was first looking into all of this, was the fact that even NASA admit that they've only got one real photo of the moon, and that was from Apollo 17, 1972, the Blue Marble. NASA freely admit that all their other photos are CGI composites. Now, their story is they have to do that because their satellites rotate the Earth, and they put all the photos together, and that's why they use composites. But how many people realize that even by NASA's own admission, they've only got one photo of the full spherical Earth? Dirth, you've been quiet over there. When did you first learn about NASA only having, despite all of their satellites and all of their missions, only having one photo that's meant to be a photo?
Very, very recently, actually, about a month ago, and I started looking into it, and NASA, even admits that it's composites, taken of strips, of multiple trips around. The shot from the moon, there's a video that shows how they did that, and it it looks legit to me, where they shot it through a round window in a low Earth orbit, and you could actually see the frame of the window framing out this Earth, and you could also see where they stick an insert into the window to make it look like the sun is on the side of what you're looking at. Then I started looking at the full shots of the Earth, or the one full shot, and you could clearly see that there's photoshopped, stepped, and repeated cloud formations. It is obviously a fake photo. John?
Sorry, mate. I was just on mute there. I was looking at the live chat. We've got more than 40 people watching live right now, and there's a number of them in there. They're putting together their objections to what we're talking about here, and I appreciate that. I promise we will look at those objections soon, but the plan was to look at NASA, debunk NASA, then look at a couple more arguments for the flat Earth, and then we'll start looking at the counter-arguments. So the time is running short. We better move on, and I know that for you, Matrix, the curvature or the lack of curvature is one of your main reasons for believing that the Earth might not be the globe that we're taught. So why don't you get the ball rolling, tell us about your own experiments, and then we'll move on to Dave and Dirk to give their takes on it.
Yeah, well, Dave mentioned it earlier, the Bedford level experiment. It's one of the things I came across as well. And, an experiment conducted in 1838 in England along a flat canal, a 6-mile stretch, dead straight stretch of a canal, river. And, I checked it out on Wikipedia, and it ties into the NASA thing because, the very brief synopsis on Wikipedia about the Bedford level experiment, it says it's only that experiment has been debunked by a photo of Earth from space. So, it's not the mathematics, it's not the experiment itself. They do mention light refraction there, but light refraction can only really account for possible 10% of the curvature. So that they, on Wikipedia, the mainstream view is that that experiment has only been debunked by a photo of Earth from space. So I performed the experiment myself, and I saw a video doing something similar. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go check it out and do the experiment myself. And I went down to the beach here and filmed about 2 feet off the ground, above sea level, about 7.71 miles across the coast to a lighthouse, across the sea to a lighthouse. And according to the curvature of the Earth, based on the Earth being 25,000 miles in circumference, the measurement is 8 inches per mile squared. So at that distance, the expected curvature drop would have been 39.6 feet. The lighthouse is 95 feet above sea level. The tower itself is 75 feet, and the building below it and the base, the rock base, is the rest. So a big part of the lighthouse tower should have been missing. And as you can see in the video, you can see all the lighthouse, the base, and even the rocks below it, and the shoreline. So the curvature just wasn't there, and it just really, how can this be? And to me, the Earth appears to be flat from all the research that I've done so far.
And if people are curious about this, Matrix, they can go to your channel where you actually went down to your local beach there in Spain. You used the telephoto lens and zoomed in, and you did the mathematics, and with your basic experiment, you disproved the curvature that should be there. People in the live chat will say to you, though, that only happened because the light bent. Now, if someone says to you, oh, the only reason why you can see around the Earth is because the light is bending, how can you rationally and how can you respond to that kind of objection?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, that's like one of the, we should be seeing all round corners, if light is bending, which doesn't happen. We should be able to see things that aren't possible. They like to attribute like the Chicago skyline being visible, clearly visible, not distorted in any way, not your typical mirage, and yet they want to write it off as a mirage. It's absurd. I don't know what to say to those people.
So we've got this situation where no one disputes the mathematics. If the circumference of the Earth is 26,000 miles, then there should be X there should be 8 inches of curvature times the mile squared from the distance of the viewer at horizon level. So after 1 mile, 8 inches, after 2 miles, 32 inches, after 3 miles, 3 squared 9, 72 inches, etc. Apologies for those using the metric system, but I was learning this through reading books that use imperial, so it works out the same whether using metric or imperial. The point is we know how much curvature there should be. Simple experiments done by people like Matrix, and going back to people like Rowbottom, who wrote his book more than 100 years ago explaining that the Earth is flat. These experiments can be done. No one disputes them. The only counter-argument they can come up with is, oh, the reason you don't see the curvature is because the light is bending. Dirth, you would have heard these objections before as well. How do you respond to them?
There's no proof of that whatsoever. The people that show videos where you can't see half of the buildings really far away when you zoom in with a telescope. If you put your telescope a foot or 2 above the water, you have to remember that's your eye level, a foot above the water or 2 feet above the water. The farther you go, the horizon gets closer and closer and closer to, the things that are sticking above that horizon get closer and closer to it. So if halfway there, as far as the telescope goes, as far as you're viewing, there's a 2 or 3 foot wave, you draw a line from that telescope, cresting that wave, it could block out the entire skyline. It could block out half the buildings, and it'll look like, oh my God, there's a horizon. But that's really just the highest, a point changing your perspective. That's how it's blocked. And it's not the curvature of the Earth. You don't see the buildings, leaning away also. You see everything straight up. So it's just, you have to examine perspective. That's all.
And that's something that we're trained to believe as well, is that the ships go over the horizon and they disappear from the bottom first. But if you pull out a telescope, what happens?
If you pull out a telescope, you can now, if you watch, and I did this just the other day, I watched a barge pulling a tugboat pulling a barge, and I watched it until it was completely gone, and then I broke out a pair of binoculars, and I could see the entire barge again. And I watched that until I couldn't see it anymore. It got a little misty, a little foggy, so I kind of lost vision of it. But I'm sure if I had a telescope and it was clear, I would be able to see it again. Can't explain that, without the bending light experiment or argument.
I can talk about this idea that light is bending. They can't have it both ways. Either light is straight or it bends. So if those people who say they see boats disappearing over the horizon, then why isn't the light bending in that case? So which way is it? Either light is going straight and things are disappearing under a horizon, or light is bending. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and can I say, I've got no issue with the notion that light bends. I believe it does. I mean, if you're driving through a hot desert, you'll see what looks like water, a few kilometers in ahead of you. But really all that is just the light bending due to different temperatures of the air. So the light from the sky is bending to your eyes. So of course light does bend. But the issue that we've got here is that you can go down to a 5, 6, 7 mile pool of water. You can look across and it looks perfectly straight. And so what they would have you believe is that the light is bending at a perfect amount to make it look flat for you, and it always does that, and it's just so convenient. And then you have to ask yourself, is it so convenient that the light is always bending that way, or is that just a convenient excuse to shut people up from asking more questions? And that's the thing with all of these things. A lot of the arguments that we would put forward for why we don't believe in globe Earth, there is a counter-argument that's offered, but rather than just accept the counter-argument, ask yourself, does that really make sense, or is it just a convenient counter-argument?
Yeah, I agree with what Dave just said. They want it both ways. The science. 1 minute they want to say it's curving, the other minute they want to say it's dead straight. I mean, there's a contradiction on what Dave pointed out there. They say about the boat sinking behind the horizon. Yet, when I do my experiment, it's like light's bending. I mean, they have another contradiction with the Coriolis effect, and the Earth supposedly spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and the atmosphere being held down by gravity, which is, so on one hand they want to say the Coriolis effect, so the Earth is spinning below, so when you a plane goes in one direction, it sort of curves, or you throw a ball and it curves. They like to show this like a very dodgy example where they have kids on a roundabout spinning around and they're throwing a ball to each other. You know, the ball's going dead straight, but from the observer it appears to be curved. I mean, the Coriolis effect is also known as the fictitious force, which is a strange name to call something, isn't it? Fictitious is a fiction, literally. And, you know, the contradiction is that, you know, if the Earth is spinning and the atmosphere is being held down, that means you've got like 1,000 mile an hour or plus wind going from west to east, you know, and or east to west, whichever way it goes. And this doesn't, you know, it doesn't affect planes or anything on the planet. Yet at the same time, they want to say that you know, it moves. If you throw a ball and it's in the air long enough, it will move along. It will change the direction. And you know, a lot of people cling to the Coriolis effect. You know, it's one of the first go-to. Oh no, I know the Earth's not flat because the Coriolis effect. I've seen water go down plug holes in the northern and southern hemisphere. But when you check on Wikipedia and other, you know, science things, you know, sites like the Library of Congress, and you know, they clearly state that that is a myth. You know, water doesn't consistently go down the same way in different directions in different hemispheres, and that the Coriolis effect. When they do the experiment, you have to be able to see it properly. The water has to sit for a day, and when they pull the plug, so the water has to sit for a day, so there's no movement on the water whatsoever. And then they have to, as they pull the plug out, it has to be so extremely precise, so as not to encourage the water to go one way or another. And you know, so the whole Coriolis effect is nonsense. I mean, to set up that experiment and perform that experiment is virtually impossible. And you know, the Coriolis effect goes on to things like people like to talk about sniper rifles and, you know, shooting over a mile or 2 miles distance with a sniper rifle, and in whatever direction you face, it goes either higher or lower or left to right. You know, but you know, if the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, that means that the Earth below you is moving 465 meters per second. So if you're firing a bullet, right, a mile long, it might take 3 or 4 seconds. So you're going to miss that target by 465 meters times the seconds. Yeah, and so the whole science is a contradiction, and they like to, you know, use these. 1 minute they're saying this, 1 minute they're saying that.
Well, Sav, sorry, not Sav. We've got a few people in the live chat. I'm going to read out their comments in a moment. But first, Matrix, with the Coriolis effect, it's probably worth explaining to people who aren't familiar with it, the basics here. So the idea is, if you're shooting a bullet from the equator, and for argument's sake, you're shooting north, then as you shoot the bullet, it'll be traveling, I guess, sort of west to east at a certain speed that the target won't be traveling at. So the idea is that the movement of the Earth, the spin of the Earth, is imparting a force, like a lateral force on the bullet, greater than the lateral force of the target. I hope I'm using that term correctly there. So the idea is that you have to account for that, and vice versa. If you're shooting from north to south, the shooter is shooting at a slower speed than the target, so you have to account for it. The problem with this is that if you're going to use that as an argument for why you have to adjust shooting bullets, putting aside whether or not that is true or whether or not snipers are trained that way, then how come the exact same thing doesn't exist with planes traveling east to west, north to south, etc.? You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say on the one hand that the bullet is affected by the spin of the Earth when its target is it, but then try and say that a plane leaving from one destination and arriving at the other, that isn't affected by the exact same force of the spinning Earth. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, you did well, explained it well there. I mean, another aspect is, you know, planes going around the Earth, they should be, you know, every 30 seconds they would need, if they're traveling at 500 miles an hour, they would need to dip 2,770 odd feet every 30 seconds. That's like almost 1/10 of their height, say like 30,000 feet approximately. So they have to dip 1/10 of their height every 30 seconds, and this doesn't happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Well, I've got a couple more arguments because I want to start getting into the counter arguments because I have a couple of issues with the flat Earth model, so I'm not 100% sold on it yet. I want to get to those in a moment. Plus, we've got objections from the live chat, but time is quickly getting away from us, so I want to spend a bit more time just looking at a couple more arguments against the ball Earth theory or for the flat Earth model. I'll throw to you there, Dave, since you have been quiet for a moment. Are there any other reasons, apart from NASA being a complete and obvious hoax, and apart from the lack of curvature, and apart from the Coriolis effect, hypocrisy, apart from these reasons that we've touched on, anything else that leads you to believe that the Earth isn't the ball that we're told?
Yeah, sure. I do want to just say a little bit about the Coriolis effect.
Go for it.
Yeah, it is the Coriolis effect. As Matrix said, it isn't a force; it's an effect. That curvature of the ball when two people sit on a merry-go-round and roll a ball to each other. The effect is just an effect. The ball is still going in a straight line. If you're looking from above the merry-go-round, you see the ball traveling in a straight line. But if you're on the merry-go-round, the effect is that it curves away from you because you're moving away from the ball. It's just an effect, and so an effect, cannot have cannot exert any force on clouds or winds. So they're trying to say that the Coriolis effect is what creates hurricanes. Yeah, when going back to the merry-go-round example, yes, does it mean that if you're on the Earth you see a hurricane, but if you're above the Earth looking down you don't see a hurricane? It's just ridiculous. But there's going away from that. One of the things that tells me that this is well, not so much a flat Earth, but an Earth that's not spinning, is the movement of the stars. Now, I can actually show some pictures here. Actually, again, I'm gonna be sort of really cat-handed with this, and try and show this picture, and I can't find it. Oh. Okay, I'm really crap at this, I'm afraid. Perhaps I won't show the picture then. So the idea is that the Earth is tilted at an angle, and the axis of spin is pointing at a star in the northern hemisphere called Polaris. And as the Earth's spinning, then the stars appear to be whirling around Polaris. Now, that's fair enough. Let's assume that's right. But apparently, the Earth is orbiting the Sun at 67,000 miles an hour, 67 times faster than the spin of the Earth. And the Sun is moving around in the cosmos and dragging the Earth and all the planets behind it at something like 600. I think it's I'm not sure about the speed. I've been told that I've got the speed wrong, but let's say 400,000 or 600,000 miles an hour. Hundreds of times faster than the speed of the Earth's spin. So why is it when you put you take a long exposure picture of the stars, the only motion you see is this supposed 1,000-mile-an-hour spin of the Earth? It's not taking into account all the other relative motion. You should see the stars making a weird, strange, pattern in the sky. All you see is the circular spin. It just doesn't make sense. So it just tells me that we're not moving. It's the stars that are moving. And there is a very famous experiment called Airy's failure that proves that it's the stars that are moving and not the Earth. It gets a bit technical. That's why I didn't include it into my video.
Well, there's also the issue, I guess you kind of touched on it there, of parallax. If we're spinning around the sun, 190 million miles is the distance that we're supposed to be from the sun, or the path that we take around the sun, then surely the constellations would change. I mean, the idea is, suppose you're in a train, the trees that are closer to you appear to be moving faster than the trees that are further away, right? As you're moving, then the distance between objects to you has an effect on what you see, what you appear to see. But the problem is that with us, we spin around the sun 190 million miles, whatever it is, and yet the constellations remain the exact same. And the astrophysicist's response to that is to say, oh, but the stars are so far away there, light years away, this made-up distance that they had to come up with to explain this. I say they're so far away that you wouldn't see any difference whatsoever, which is why we have the exact same constellations today that they had thousands of years ago. And if you can't see a problem with that, then there's not really much I can do for you.
Well, more than that is, as for all of recorded history, the pole has always pointed at the pole star, Polaris. So any relative movement of the Earth and the solar system, will shift that alignment. I mean, how can the Earth, if it's moving and spinning and wobbling, how can it still be aligned with Polaris unless Polaris is moving, exactly in lockstep with the Earth? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, I'll throw to Dirth in a moment because I know he's got another point to make. Before I do, I want to say thanks to all the live listeners for joining us. We've had more than 40 people watching throughout the show. It's good to have you guys on board. The chat's been pretty good for the most part. We have had a number of people in the chat, though. They've been very belligerent. They've obviously devoted a lot of their life to believing in what I call scientism, and they've got their hands wrapped around their big ball Earth, and they don't want to let go. And I understand that it can be hard to let go of your belief in the ball Earth. The only point that I would make is if you want to be belligerent in the chat, then hopefully you'll join us next week. I'd love to have all of the ball earthers join us, and we can have a rational, civil discussion when you guys can present your viewpoints, just as myself and the other panels are doing tonight. We can discuss this in a rational, gentlemanly manner. But if you only want to sit in the chat and throw out belligerent comments but not take up the offer of joining us next week, then that's pretty pathetic, and you need to grow some balls. But I'll throw to you there, Dirth. You've been quiet for a little while there, mate. We've got a bit more time to look at the arguments for the flat Earth theory or against globe Earth. I know you've got another topic you want to bring up. What is it?
Which topic were you thinking I wanted to bring up?
Well, I think it'll make a nice segue. I know that you see flight paths as being a good argument for flat Earth, and I happen to disagree. So I think this will make a nice segue into the next segment, which is objection. So why don't you give us a basic background to the flight path argument, and then we'll get into a broad discussion about that.
All right. So if you look at this map right here, the top left map, this is a flat representation of the globe Earth. And if you try to go from, I have it from the tip of Africa to New Zealand, it should be about a 12-hour flight. But if you go to the second map, the way the flights go are up to Europe and all the way down. It's like a 20+ hour flight. If you take this same flight path and put it on a flat Earth map, it's a straight line, which makes perfect sense. It makes sense on a flat Earth. It doesn't make sense on a ball Earth. Why they would do that? A great way to prove that the Earth is not a ball, or the Earth is a ball, is to take a trip from the tip of Africa, or better yet, South America, to Australia or New Zealand, and see if it takes 12 hours or the amount of time it should take if the Earth was a ball, because there are no shortcuts on a flat Earth. And John, why do you disagree with that?
Oh, well, I've got a couple of reasons why I do, but before I give my objection, because basically, for those who are new to all of this, the flight paths are used, especially, say someone like Mark Sargent, I think his fifth or sixth clue was based on flight paths, and this is used as an argument against ball Earth, the argument being, why would you take these flight paths on a globe? You'd take different flight paths, and if you look at the flight paths, they make more sense on the flat Earth model, right? That's the argument. I don't subscribe to it. In fact, I think the flight paths lend more weight to the ball theory. I'll get to that in a moment. Before I do, though, I want to throw to both Matrix and Dave to get their input. Matrix, have you spent much time looking at the flight paths? Do you think it does add to the ball Earth or to the flat Earth?
Yeah, I definitely think it adds to the flat Earth argument. I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at Flight Radar 24 and FlightAware.com, and to me, the flight routes are couldn't be more suspicious if they tried. I've tracked various different flights, and flights seem to turn off their GPS when they fly from southern continent to southern continent, for instance, South America to Australia. And one of the flights, when they go over the sea, they turn it off just after they've taken off, and they turn it back on just as they're coming into land. And some of the flights, the very few flights that exist, allegedly exist, are just extremely suspicious. One I've tracked is the Qantas flight from Santiago, Chile, from Sydney, Australia to Santiago, Chile, which on a ball Earth would take 12 hours. And I think this is the better example to use rather than the Africa to New Zealand. And I watched this flight for all day long and screen captured it. And when on Flight Radar 24, Qantas lists every flight that's in the air at that time. Yeah, and this flight wasn't on their list, yet it was allegedly in the air. And to me, there's like one or two flights that do this, and I think they're ghost flights. There's lots of problem with missing data. One on FlightAware.com, they had this same flight I was watching, tracking it, and you could see it go all the way across the ocean, and which was quite strange. Yet there was loads and loads of missing data, and other than these handful of direct long-haul flights, every other flight goes via either the Middle East or goes via North America, and pretty much forms a straight line on a flat map. And they don't fly over Antarctica either, which would be a more direct route. Save a lot of time, fuel, and so on. And these flights, connecting flights that go via North America or the Middle East, Dubai, for instance, they take like 24 hours, 36 hours, 40 hours. Which is more likely on a flat Earth model.
So, well, Metrics, I've got my own take on that. I'll come to it in a moment. But first, we'll throw to allegedly Dave. Allegedly, do you use the flight paths as an argument for or against flat or ball Earth? What's your take on all of this?
Definitely for the flat Earth. Matrix basically covered most of the points I wanted to make. Every time I looked at a Southern Hemisphere flight, again, the stopovers all seem to be nonsensical, but they all lined up in a straight line, without fail. They always lined up in a straight line on the flat Earth model. So that kind of lends weight to it. And the point that, GPS, which is supposedly, a global positioning system, is turned off for Southern Hemisphere flights, is very suspicious. All we've got is circumstantial evidence for all this, but we've got a lot of circumstantial evidence for it.
All right, then. Well, here's where you guys can win me over, because this is one area where I've never used the flight paths as an argument for my globe Earth skepticism, and I'll tell you why. Two reasons. Firstly, I flew from Johannesburg to Perth 5 years ago. I'd spent a few months in Africa. Came back and I flew direct from Johannesburg to Perth, and obviously it was a nighttime flight, so I was asleep. So in theory, it's possible that we could have stopped at a refueling point. But even then, the time that it took us to fly was only something like 8 or 9 hours, and I've still got the itinerary to this day, so I could check this. Now, if it is the case that we were only flying for 8 or 9 hours, then on the flat Earth model, what was the plane traveling, faster than the speed of sound? Like, assuming, just for argument's sake, that I did catch that, I don't expect you guys to believe me, but just help me out here. Assuming that I remember this correctly, if I did fly from Johannesburg to Perth in 8 hours, how would that reconcile with the flat Earth map? I'll let you answer first, Matrix. Can you see where I'm coming from here? How would that work out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard you mention that before, but for me, that flight from South Africa to Australia isn't such a great difference in distance, I don't think. Unlike the South America to Australia, which is a much bigger distance. So I'm not sure how applicable the argument is.
Yeah, right then. Well, here's my next one. I decided Dave, you go, mate. Yep.
Yeah, can I get that? Because I think you. Then your memory must be a little faulty, because even on the ball Earth, it's a 12 to 14 hour, 12-hour trip, at least 12 to 14-hour trip. So it's not 8 hours. That's one of the flights I was looking at. even with going with conventional, it's a 12 to 14 hour trip.
Well, what I'll do is, Dave, and that's fine, man. Like, here's the thing: we're having a discussion, and I could easily be wrong. I actually happen to still have the itinerary from the flight. Now, again, the itinerary could be wrong, and I could have been lied to and just not noticed. So that's entirely possible. Or my memory could be faulty. If you guys just give me 2 minutes, I'll go see if I can find it, because I did check it out the other day. I'll come back and we'll get back to it. While I'm gone, I'll throw to you there, Dave. Take it away.
Well, which Dave? Well, I was just going to say that, I was looking at it. It turned out to be a 7,310-mile flight, and going at, I think it's 600. I don't have the figures with me, but I think it's a 650 mile an hour cruising speed. That works out about 12 hours, and so I don't know what details you've got.
Sorry, guys. So, yeah, I just got back. I'm not sure what was said while I was away. But look, I've got my itinerary here. And again, I don't expect anyone to believe me. This is just anecdotal evidence. But if you guys just give me the benefit of the doubt here, my flight, and I can scan this and upload it if people want to check this out. This was from departing Johannesburg International at 10:30 their time and arriving in Perth at 1:25 in the afternoon Perth time. And it says journey 8 hours 55 minutes. So 10:30 Johannesburg time to 1:30 for argument's sake Perth time. Journey time 9 hours, and that was in an Airbus A340 jet. Now here's the thing. Again, we left at night time 10:30, so I would have slept on the trip. So again, it is possible that anything could have happened while I was asleep. But I definitely did arrive in Perth at the time that I was supposed to, or even give or take an hour or two, because I had to catch a connecting flight to Melbourne. I was living in Melbourne at the time. So again, I don't expect anyone to believe me. This is just anecdotal, but if my itinerary is correct, and if my memory is correct, then I did fly between Johannesburg and Perth in it says here 9 hours, even if we were an hour late, which I wouldn't have cared about at the time, because hey, I just got back from a 6-month trip. Who cares if the plane's an hour late? I wouldn't remember that. Say we were an hour late. That's still a journey of 10 hours. Is that really possible on a flat Earth map?
Dave, how long is it supposed to take on a flat Earth map? I didn't do that calculation. You're muted.
Okay, I'm looking at it now. Actually, I'm getting 11 hours 50 minutes, and that's I'm trying to find the distance. Well, I don't have the distance on here, but 11 hours 50 minutes. So,
and that's from Johannesburg to Perth, is it, Dave?
Johannesburg to Perth.
Yeah, and I fully believe that's what your computer's showing. And again, if my official journey time was 9 hours, they could easily have made us get back an hour late. I still would have caught my connecting flight, and I wouldn't have known the difference. So this, like, even if my memory and my itinerary are pretty accurate, this doesn't disprove the flat Earth model. But hopefully you guys can see how I don't think that I personally don't see the flight routes as the best argument for flat Earth. Do you get where I'm coming from?
But there's something a bit dodgy there, because you're saying your itinerary says 8 or 9 hours. Yeah, the physical distance and the cruising speed of a plane is saying much more than that. There's something not right there.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Well, here's the next one then. I called up a flight centre here in Brisbane actually a couple of days ago, and I decided to pretend that I wanted to fly from our east coast to Santiago, Chile. And I sat there with the travel agent, and it was a real pain. I hate talking to those people, but I thought I'm going to do it. I'm going to at least try to book a flight. And we sat there, and she did. She claims to have a flight that I could have booked for less than $2,000 actually. Return, $2,000 return. That would have been, according to her, a direct flight from Sydney to Santiago, Chile. Now, obviously, it might be the case that you book the flight, but then it never happens. But I have heard people say, oh, there are direct flights, but they're prohibitively expensive, so no one takes them, and those who do get shafted onto other flights. But this flight was $2,000 return, and it was direct from Sydney to Santiago to Chile. and then it was Chile, New Zealand, back to Sydney. But the flight from Australia to Chile, at least according to their official story, was direct non-stop. So how do you reply to that?
You didn't take it though, did you?
No, I didn't. And that's the thing. They could be lying, but the only way I could check would be to spend $2,000 to do the return flight. And don't get me wrong, I am very tempted to do exactly that. But in the meantime, can we really honestly say that those flights don't exist when they are being offered?
Yeah, I think that flight may be as you turn up for the flight, it might have been cancelled and you might be redirected by the Middle East or something like that. I mean, for me, when I've looked at Flight Radar 24 and I'm looking at Qantas flight, the Qantas flight from Sydney, Australia to Santiago, Chile, it supposedly is alleging, it says that it lists every flight that's in the air at that time, and the flight wasn't listed. So,
all right, then how's this one for you? If I were, just give me a sec, Dirth. If I were to book the flight, for argument's sake, okay, just hear me out. If I was to book this flight and fly from Sydney to Chile, and I stayed awake the whole time, and as far as I could tell, there was no refueling, and we did it in the allotted 14 hours, whatever it was, if I were to do that, would that put a dent in the flat Earth model, hypothetically?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would.
It would change. It would add a lot of questions for sure, if not crush the flat Earth model. But you would have to be on a normal plane, which is pretty easy to identify. You could tell that you're flying at on a normal speed, and it would be impossible on a flat Earth if that's the case. So let's do it. I'll chip in $500.
If you're being serious, he has this for an idea. If you're serious that you'll chip in $500, then that means all I've got to do is save up a little bit more. I'll do it. I'm not joking around here, because if I book that flight, I get on it, and then I go direct to Chile, then I can put all of this Ball Earth. Look, there's still many problems with the Ball Earth. The Ball Earth for me is finished. It's done. But at least then I can dismiss the azimuthal map. Not dismiss it, but at least it puts a huge dent in it. Do you see what I'm saying? But if I go to Sydney International and they say, sorry, Mr. LeBon, but your flight has been cancelled, we've put you on one to Auckland, then that just adds more weight to the flat Earth model. Like, for me, that'd be a definitive piece of evidence, for me personally.
I'm in 500.
And if she says to me, sorry, Mr. LeBon, we've had to put you on a different flight, the first thing I do is Skype call my mate David Weiss in New York, and I say, mate, it's all over. The globe Earth is dead. Finished. Bury it.
Let's do it. Any of you ball earthers in the chat that want to throw in a few bucks, John will gladly give you his PayPal account, and you could fire away.
I'm not kidding. I'll do it. I've got a bit of money there. I've been planning to flee Australia and head to Europe, but I'll put my plans on hold just for a little experiment. But what I would hope is, if I were to do that, if I were to fly from Sydney International to Chile, and I'd been promised a direct non-stop flight, and I made it explicit to the travel agent. I said to her, listen, I'm only going to book this flight if you can promise me it's direct, and I made up a bullshit excuse as to why, and she promised me, yep, we can do that, no worries. If I were to get this flight direct, and it was mysteriously cancelled, and I was mysteriously rerouted through Auckland or whatever, my question to the live chat is, those of you who still want to hold on to the Ball Earth, would you guys reconsider your opinions? Because the panel, Dirth has just told me he'd reconsider his opinions if the evidence said it was that the flights didn't work the way that the flat Earth says they would. Would you Ball Earthers change your opinions if all of a sudden I got rerouted through Auckland from a direct flight? Would you change your mind? Because if you wouldn't, then maybe no evidence will change your mind, and this isn't really the conversation for you. The only reason why I, Dave, Dirth, or Matrix got into this field of inquiry is because we were willing to change our minds. And I, for one, would be willing to change it straight back again. I'm not invested in any of this, but it seems to me that a lot of Ball Earthers, they're completely invested in the Ball Earth. It would shatter their whole paradigm if they found out they weren't living on a ball. Dirth, I'll throw it to you.
That would shatter the flat Earth, explanation. It would still leave a lot of other questions. But if a chain link chain has a broken link in it, it's broken. So I haven't found any that break the flat Earth. I've found lots that break the ball Earth. But if we can just show that you can make that flight, that would change everything.
Yeah, I think it would put a dent in the flat Earth model. I wouldn't say it would crush it. I would say we just have to really look at how things are laid out. I think there are a lot of anomalies in both models. And mysteries to be solved, and perhaps we won't be allowed to solve those mysteries. I mean, we don't even know what the moon is. As we look at it, it appears to, they say it's spherical, but when we look at it, the light is illuminated uniformly. It is not diffused light around the edges. It appears to be flat, and some strange stuff going on with the moon. So we don't even know what the moon is, the sun, or the stars really are. And John, you're right, John. If you do make that flight to South America, I recommend going to a place in Bolivia called Salar de Uyuni. Right, and it's this 4,000 square miles salt flats, perfectly flat, formed over thousands of years. Yeah, and when it rains there, the water, the surface is covered in a bit of shallow water, and the reflections are absolute perfect reflections of the sky above. So what you're seeing is the sky reflecting on the ground below. It's one of the most amazing, beautiful places on Earth. And I'm trying to finish up this video on it because I've got so much footage showing that the reflections are perfect. There's no curvature distortion, and it's such a beautiful place. And so I think you should check that out if you're going to go to South America, because that's one place I'd love to go.
Well, Matrix, you and Dirth have inspired me. I'm going to start a GoFundMe. I'm not kidding around here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a GoFundMe. I'll work out how much money I need to go and spend a week or two in South America. I'll go and do the salt flat plains that you've spoken about. I'll fly direct, and I'll go and do some ayahuasca and channel my inner spirits and ask them if the Earth is a ball or a plane. And then between those three pieces of evidence, I should be sold. I've got one more major objection to the ball Earth model, and it's coming from the live chat. Enchanted Wanderer wants to know how to explain what she calls the South Celestial Star. Now, I've got a response to that, but I've been speaking for too much. First, we'll go to Dave, then we'll go to Dirth. How do you respond to people who argue that there's a South Celestial pole, that that stars rotate around the south? Dave, I'll throw to you first.
Well, I've got to say this is one of the things that's still a sticking point for me. I've come across this star, the Southern Pole Star, Sigma Octantis, and supposedly the stars spin around that in the opposite way. I think it's clockwise, as opposed to anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere. Now, I can't explain it in any conventional way. As I said, I'm not completely sold on the flat Earth model, because that's one of the reasons. The concave Earth model would solve that, but I'm not a fan of the concave Earth model either. But I've been trying to research this as well, and at this point, I can't find any definitive proof that the stars do behave like that. I don't have anything definitive from an observer in the tip of Australia with say the time lapse footage showing that there is a Southern Pole Star, and it's not the North Pole Star. I don't know, so I'm still looking at that.
That's a fair response. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll read out the question directly, because in the live chat they're indicating that I haven't read it out fairly. So I'll read this one out as it was posted to me on Skype, actually, from Enchanted Warrior. She says, please make sure you ask them about star trails. I've heard a couple of people say things about the Southern Celestial Pole Star that are just not true. Please make sure you don't gloss over this. I have lots of evidence regarding the Southern Celestial Pole. So she's talking, I think Enchanted is talking about star trails, and I guess if you're a listener and this is all new to you, I think the argument goes that if you use time-lapse photography and you aim it at the northern star, Polaris, you'll see that the stars rotate in one direction, but if you aim your time-lapse camera at the so-called southern pole celestial star, that the stars rotate in another direction. I've got a response to that. Dave has just given his. We'll go to you there, Dirth. Have you heard this objection, and what's your response to it?
Yeah, my objection is it's all about perspective. Just imagine you're standing at an observatory, you're doing a time lapse, you're facing the North Star, which is about 45 degrees off the horizon, and you see these trails coming up off the right side, going counterclockwise around the North Star, and they're coming up off of your right shoulder, your right side, going over your head and going down on your left side. Now, if you turn towards the equator, they're going straight up over your head and behind you. And if you turn farther to the right, they're now coming up on your left side, going over to your right side because you're facing south. You've just turned around, and therefore your perspective is seeing them go in the opposite direction, but it's still the same picture. I don't know if you can visualize what I was saying, but just if you turn around, they're going the other way.
Yeah. Look, it makes sense to me. I used to have this exact same objection, and because I've seen the photos of the time-lapse photography, and it does look like the stars are going a different way on the south. But I think Eric Dubai, in a video that he posted maybe a week ago now, I think he explains this really well. He uses computer graphics. I'm not sure how he puts it together, but if you watch it, I think you might find it convincing. Basically, here's how I would put it to you. Suppose you're on a road in your car and you're flying through a big bug swarm, and the bug swarm is all spinning in a circle. It's all going, for argument's sake, it's going anti-clockwise. And you happen to go through an edge of that bug swarm, and the bug swarm is just edging over the road. Most of those bugs will look like they're heading one way to you at the right-hand side of your car. But the ones that are on the very perimeter of that swarm, the ones that go around your car, they look like they're going the other way. But in fact, they're all spinning in the exact same direction. Now, I'm not sure if I've explained that very well to the listeners. Again, if you want to check it out, go and check out Eric Dubai's video. I'll post a link underneath this video on the info box. But what I'm trying to get you to do is to imagine it's about your perspective. And so if we're talking about a group of stars, we'll call them stars for argument's sake, that are so large that you're sort of caught in between one group of it and the ones on the edge, then the ones on the edge will look like they're going a different direction to you simply because of perspective. And if I haven't articulated myself, I do apologize, but that's the point I'm trying to make. Dirth, do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, so you're driving down the road, these counterclockwise swarm is hitting you. There's a car coming the other direction going through the swarm. What are they going to see? They're going to see a clockwise swarm because they're coming in the other direction. It depends on which way you're facing.
Yeah, it's perspective. I agree with you. And here's the thing. I'm not saying that people should hear my explanation and be convinced by it. This one took me a couple of months of constantly looking at, trying to get my head around before I thought to myself, oh, I can see where people like Dubai are coming from. And I should point out, I've bought Dubai's book. It cost me $10. I went and printed it off. I'm still reading it. I'm not completely sold on the flat Earth model, but I've seen enough arguments now, and we've only touched on some of them this evening, that make me very skeptical of the globe Earth. And we might get more time to talk about those later, but we've heard from me, Dave, and Dirth about this southern celestial star trail problem. I'll throw to you there, Matrix. What do you have to say about all of this?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting part of the debate, and it's hard to get your head around it. And I think it's a matter of perspective. There are different documented accounts of not being able to see the South Pole Star, Sigma Octantis, from every point at the same time in the southern hemisphere, different locations across, whether it's South America or Australia or whatever. I think it's definitely something to be investigated more. And can we count on some of the videos that we've seen? I mean, I've seen a lot of trickery with time lapse and lenses and so on, fisheye lenses, and I'm not convinced about a lot of the time lapse photography. So I hope people, some people make a video. I can't do that. Somewhere in Australia, I'm in Spain. I see the stars going across east to west over my head, appear to be sort of slightly curving toward, around Polaris, and so it's definitely something, perhaps needs a little bit more investigation for myself, and but also, what are the stars? We don't know what the sun and the moon really are. We don't know what stars are or how they behave, and how they're situated in the sky. Are they on a dome? Are they just much bigger space, or what? We really don't know. So to use that as evidence, conclusive evidence, it's not conclusive evidence, even if you can show it to be circling in that direction, I think.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Well, I'll tell you what, we've gone through the first sort of 4/5 of this show very quickly. I think it's only fair if we do spend the last little portion dealing strictly with our own problems, or the problems from the live chat with the flat Earth model. I've already indicated my two main ones, the fly paths and the southern celestial sky trails, if you like. It took me a couple months to get my head around. I'll throw to you first there, Dave. We are so lucky to have you on the show with us today. Like we said at the start of the show, you put together essentially a feature-length film discussing the flat Earth, and you finished it by saying essentially that you don't know that the Earth is flat, but the evidence that you've seen leads you to believe that it is. What are the main sticking points that you still have that keep you from saying 100% flat?
Well, there is the only one. There is the only southern pole star. Now, some have said that what they're seeing is the northern pole star, Polaris, and and we're seeing as Dirth said, we're seeing the counter, revolution because of perspective. But there are people who are saying that the southern pole star is completely different from the northern pole star. So I'm still investigating that. I do know for absolute certain that we're not clinging on a rock, and I'm absolutely sure there is no such thing as space. But that's the only thing that is holding me back from saying definitively that it's a flat Earth.
That's a good answer. Well, I want to come back. I've got a couple more for you, Dave, before we wrap up this episode 1 of the Global Skeptics Talk. So just stay on hold there. But Matrix, we'll go to you. What are the main sticking points that you've got, if any, from the flat Earth model?
Yeah, well, the star conundrum is something I haven't figured out quite yet. How we view the sun, the moon, for instance, is an issue for me. If it's a flat disk flying above us, circling over us, will it change its shape? Will it become a bit more ellipse? But this also applies to the globe Earth model. So something I'm definitely looking into more and more about what is the moon, and how trying to observe these things. How come the moon is full moon can be visible in the day sky, and some of these aspects of like the eclipse, the phases of the moon, and for me, it's about looking at all the different evidence and trying to figure it out. And for me, I've seen nothing really conclusive about proving it being a sphere, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's flat. And for me, one of the big things is where's the curvature, and gravity. Gravity just seems to be a nonsense theory. I mean, for me, I think it's so much of science is lies built upon lies. From like heliocentricity to gravity, to Darwin's evolution, and to NASA and the space myth, and Stephen Hawking's theoretical physics. I mean, I think it's all just lies built upon lies, and at this top point in time, and I think there's an agenda. People say, why is it important? Why are we looking at this subject? And I think there's an agenda to hide the creator and control people's minds. And we're seeing evidence of that, cognitive dissonance, especially with this subject matter. It's so taboo, and so I'm surprised that you see such anger and hatred towards just seeking the truth and doing investigative research and questioning where we are, because I mentioned before, where we are really determines who we are, and it's the underlying fundamental of our existence. So that's why it's an important subject, and I don't understand. Well, I don't sympathise with people who are getting angry and frustrated about the subject.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think a lot of the people in the live chat have been terrific so far tonight. Thanks to all of those for their contributions. There's one or two, and they're behaving in the live chat right now the same way that a TV zombie would react if you told them that Boston bombings was a hoax or that 9/11 wasn't done by Osama bin Laden. That same vitriolic, rabid, emotional attachment that they have to a story, when you challenge it, they behave in a certain way. And there's one or two in the live chat. I think they're letting themselves down, and maybe in time they'll look back and think they could have done it themselves a little bit more. They could have handled themselves a little bit better than they have. But I think most of the people in the chat, they've done a terrific job. We do have to wrap the show up in about 15 or 20 minutes. We're coming towards the closing moments of the show. Dearth, I've already asked Dave and Matrix what their sticking points are. For you, what are the one or two final hurdles that you have to jump before you would officially call yourself a flat earther?
You know, I'm looking for evidence. I say it at the beginning of every discussion that the Earth is round. I want to prove that the Earth is round. I just haven't found any. The biggest issue I'm personally having is, you know, I've done a lot of research on, you know, 9/11, Sandy Hook, and Boston, and other, you know, deceptions that have been cast over us, and it took, you know, a lot of time to wake people up to the stuff. And now all of a sudden, I'm coming out arguing, you know, looking for proof that the Earth is round is the most delicate way I can say it, which just throws people off. You know, people, as I said earlier, people hear, oh, the Earth is flat, discredit every single thing you say. You know, and there's other people out there going, there's more important things out there, you know, like geoengineering. And yes, geoengineering is a really important, dire issue we're having. But I've noticed that you can wake people up to 9/11, to Sandy Hook, to Boston. You know what they do after they're awake? They go back to work, they watch sports, and they drink. You know, but if you wake somebody up to the deception that we are not on a round ball and there is probably far more beyond the boundary that we have been encaged in, you know, metaphorically, that is a game changer. And that might help people wake up and realize there is far more out there. You know, I don't think the flat Earth discredits religious belief. You know, in the Bible, there's a lot of truth in the Bible, and the Earth being flat does not change that. You know, I believe that, you know, that we live on a immense, I won't say endless because nobody really knows what endless is, ice sheet, you know, miles thick, and we have a sun, you know, that is orbiting in a flat plane over it that has melted out a puddle that we know as Earth. But I believe that the Earth goes on, and there may be other puddles just, you know, 100 miles, 50 miles, 1,000 miles over the Antarctic ice boundary that we have all been restricted on. And there could be thousands, millions, billions of them with other puddles. You know, we might have our military, our governments might be, you know, exploring them, might have populated them. You know, all of the millions of people that go missing every year with no explanation, maybe they're populating these other puddles, we'll call it. You know, the story of Admiral Byrd, last point, whether it's true or not. If it's true, you know, he said he flew into Antarctica and he came across a tropical land. It could have just been he landed in, you know, another melted puddle with another sun, if you will, that has made a beautiful tropical land. You know, it all makes a lot more sense than you know, other planets, you know, with life traveling billions of light years to get here versus traveling tens of thousands of miles.
Well, I'll tell you what, you've touched on something that I want to finish the show on, which is to do with our own speculations about what's really going on. Before we do, I know that Dave wanted to add something to the discussion on the moon. Dave, what was it that you wanted to contribute to that?
Well, it was just something that Matrix was saying about the moon. Now, I'm going to share a picture. I'm not sure if you're all seeing that. This is what... can you all see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the things that basically when I show people, it's one of the things that actually gets them really thinking about it. This picture is of the moon in the clouds, and the interesting thing about that is that only the clouds closest to the moon are illuminated. All the clouds furthest away aren't lit up at all. Now, if the moon was 400,000 miles away, then all the clouds to be lit up, not just the ones closest to it. Now, you can't argue with that. You can't. There's no sort of lensing effect that you can sort of come up with that would debunk that. Yeah, it's only that the moon is a lot closer than we've been led to believe. And I agree with Matrix completely that this is a very important issue, because along with the theory of evolution, these two ideas have constrained man to a unimportant little microbe that evolved from monkeys, and the monkeys evolved from slime, and we're just tiny things on a small rock in the middle of an endless expanse. Yeah,
I'm so glad you bring that up, Dave, because that was the topic that I wanted to finish on tonight before we wrap up the show, and that was to do with since the panel, the members first started looking into the flat Earth, how has it affected the way that we see other things? Because for me, this has been one of the biggest things that I've taken from this. Hypothetically, if I do take a flight from Sydney to Santiago, and I'm certain there were no stops, and I'm certain that it only fits the ball Earth, or at least it doesn't fit in with the flat Earth, and suppose that I eventually start believing the ball Earth thing, which, by the way, I've got tons of objections to the ball Earth. The flight path is only like that wouldn't disprove everything, but just say hypothetically I go back to believing that we're on a spinning ball. By reconsidering my views about the Earth that we're living on, by reconsidering my views about NASA, by reconsidering my views about science, academia, government, TV control of the masses, the ignorance of the masses, cognitive dissonance, all the rest of it, it's helped me to reconsider my own life and the way that I lead my own life and my relationship with the Earth on which I stand. And it's had a huge effect on my life, no matter what the Earth turns out to be. So what I wanted to do was to spend the last few moments of this show with you guys, asking what effect it's had on you since you've started doing this research. So we might as well go around the panel. We'll start with you, Dave, because you are the very special guest for episode 1 of the Globe Earth Skeptics. Since you first started looking into all of this, how has it changed your outlook on other things?
Gosh, I'm honoured to be the very special guest. How it's affected me is quite profoundly, actually, because it's made me actually look at the Bible in a real way. And I have gone from a complete atheist, which I was when I was deep in the Matrix. I was complete and utter dyed-in-the-wool atheist. And during my awakening period and my research period, I gained a kind of spirituality. And now I'm utterly, absolutely sure of the existence of the Creator. And it's made me look at the Bible. And when you look at the Bible, and I'm not talking about the Bibles that the Roman Catholic Church put out there, but if you look at the King James 1611, and you cross-reference it with all the books that were left out of the Bible that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other works like the Testament of Solomon and the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Greek mythology, you find a completely different story emerges, and one that is absolutely relevant for right now, actually. And it doesn't contradict, the flat Earth doesn't contradict the Bible. The Bible basically says it is, a flat Earth, and it's a flat, unmovable, fixed Earth. It's changed me quite a bit, and actually I misnamed my video. I called it The Biggest Lie of All. This research has made me uncover an even bigger lie, and the Bible is the basis of that even bigger lie.
Well, that is a terrific answer, Dave, and it's been terrific to have you on the show. And if you want to join us again for next week's episode, you'll be more than welcome. You've got an open invitation. We'll give you a chance for your final thoughts before we wrap up the show, but we need to get around the panel right now because I know that Dirth has to be on his way. So, Dirth, can I ask you, since you first started looking into the Flat Earth, I know that you've said that you used to ban people from your website because you thought they were spamming you to do with the Flat Earth. Since then, you kind of feel remorseful because you realise you weren't giving them enough of a chance. Not talking about so much the one-to-one level, but a broader level, how has all of this changed your outlook on other things?
My mind was opened up when I discovered, shortly after 9/11, I witnessed it from my shore. I could see it. I didn't watch it on TV, so I had a slightly different perspective than the rest of the world that watched it on TV. And when I started realizing the deceptions that were going on, and then after that, I discovered Sandy Hook in Boston. I thought that I realized the scale of what was going on. And now that I'm looking into this, I realize that I wasn't even grasping the immensity of the deception and the control over the people. And as Dave said, it has really made me reconsider my religious beliefs. I used to believe in evolution, I'm embarrassed to say, but now I believe that there is a creator. I don't like to label it, or we're all part of God, but there is intelligent design, and we are under control here, and we need to all wake up to what is going on, and that is the answer to our problems.
Another terrific answer. I kind of feel like it would have been better to start the show off with this discussion to let people see that there's more to this than just, is the Earth globe or is it flat? And what's more, look, when I was young, I was almost trained to believe that the only people who are alive today who believe that the Earth is flat are people who only believe that because they believe the Bible literally. That's what I was trained to believe. I wasn't told that there's a group of people out there who do their own experiments, who aren't religious in the conventional sense. They just don't believe in the globe Earth model. And it's interesting, isn't it, how indoctrinated that we are into the globe Earth model from the time we're little kids. We're told this is how the Earth it is. Only crazy people think otherwise. There's no good arguments for believing otherwise, and don't you ever dare question anything or else people will think you're crazy. And yet, over the last few months, this has simply opened the door for me to ask other questions. Matrix, I'll throw to you. You and I have been discussing the flat Earth model or the globe Earth skepticism for probably a month or two now on Sunday sessions, which I host on Sunday nights. And over that time, you've seen my views about all of this change, from point to point. I've seen your views kind of solidify as well. Looking beyond just a flat Earth, globe Earth question, how else has this affected your outlook on life?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of a profound effect, really. I mean, it's an existential question. It's like, for me, I'm trying to decode the matrix and to see, I wonder how far we can actually go down the rabbit hole. I mean, is there anything beyond this, this subject? It's about seeking the truth, and that takes time to uncover and investigate it. And now I've always believed in a creator, and the awakening process is, maybe question my spirituality and revisit the Bible. And I got into Christianity for a bit. I studied it and looked at the various things and stuff. And I think there's some truth in there, but I also have some issues with it. And but I mean, overall, I see complexity in the creation. And this subject has definitely changed how I look at the place that we're living. For me, it ties into my belief that evolution and the Big Bang are nonsense. It adds more weight to that, and it's a related subject, And my experience having researched this virtually every day for the last almost 6 months now. It's just I've learned so many things. It's fascinating investigation, subject to investigate. I mean, we learn about science, whatever it is, whatever way you want to look at it. You're re-examining science. Everything we know, and that takes time to go through all the vast subject. And I found, like, looking at the proofs of the sphere, the top 10 proofs, and they're just, when you question these things, and you do a bit of research, you find out that those top 10 proofs are, easily debunked, and they're not proofs at all. And if the Earth was really a sphere, why aren't the best proofs listed in that top 10? So the whole subject has made me, I'm glad that I'm seeking the truth and on this path, and been on it for a while. And I know about 9/11 and various other conspiracies and stuff, but this subject is just so profound and all-encompassing. I mean, everything comes under this, and that's why I love it. I'm loving it. I'm really enjoying researching this subject, whether it turns out to be true or not. I mean, for me, It's changed how I look at the world, and I see things as flat now. I go out, I live on the side of a mountain, and I look across the valley, and I see the sky, and I absorb it all, and I feel like we're stationary, and the stars are spinning above us, and that I'm living on a flat plane of some kind. I don't know the bounds of it. I don't know what goes beyond Antarctica. Now, Antarctica is a big question mark, isn't it, on what's really going on there and where it is, and so I'm really enjoying the experience of investigating the subject, because it takes you in so many different places and directions, avenues of investigation.
That's where I found your input on Sunday sessions so refreshing, Matrix, is because of that perspective that you've got on this, that it's not just about the shape of the Earth, it's about where else it takes you. And in the live chat, Matty V, Phuket, Thailand, referring to Dave's speech earlier, he says that was a great speech. And Honest Trolling says that this all does seriously make you rethink divinity. And for me, that's exactly what's happened. I wasn't raised in a religious, in a Christian or a typically religious household. By the way, I think most Australians are religious, but they're not religious in a Christian or Muslim or Judaic sense. They're religious in the sense that money is their God and TV is their pastor, and they're very dogmatic about that. They can't think in any other terms. We are religious in this country, we just don't realise it. But I mean in the conventional sense of religion, I wasn't raised in a religious household, and I don't consider myself religious. I don't believe that there's a man in the sky with a beard or anything like that, but all of a sudden I realised we're far more special than they want us to realise. They want us to believe that 13.8 billion years ago, out of nowhere, everything just suddenly appeared, and then a few 100 million years ago, this process of evolution began, and next thing you know, cells started dividing, and then next thing you know, there's germs in the mud, and then next thing you know, there's fish with legs, and just follow through this logical absurdity right to the end. Suddenly there are humans, and then you'll be born, you'll live for 70, 80 years, but there's no morals, there's no absolute truth. It's all relative. It's all based on random reactions between chemicals that you have no real say in. Eventually you'll die, and none of it will matter because the world will go on, and blah, blah, blah. And sadly, you say that you're embarrassed, Earth, you used to believe that. Well, guess what? I didn't just used to believe that. I used to mock and ridicule those who thought otherwise, which just shows how indoctrinated I was and how stupid I was, that I had this completely and utterly hopeless outlook on life, and I didn't realize that one of the reasons why I wasn't happy and why most people around me weren't happy, and I don't believe most people today are happy, is because they've been given this utterly hopeless worldview. And then when you start to reconsider what we're really standing on and how we really got here, things start to change very quickly. And even if I sound completely crazy to other people when I question the globe Earth model, and again, I'll repeat this one more time because I think some people in the chat haven't quite got this. I'm not saying the world is flat. I've got a couple of big objections to the flat Earth model, but I've got way more objections to the ball Earth model. I haven't even read out most of my objections yet. There's probably half a dozen things that I could sit here and reel off right now that do not make sense about the ball Earth. Just for one quick example, if it is the case that the equator is higher, that it's got a greater sort of distance from the center of the Earth owing to gravitational force or centrifugal force or whatever Neil deGrasse Tyson story is, then that would mean that rivers like the Mississippi are flowing up. Like they're flowing upwards several kilometers. That's just utterly absurd, but that would have to be the case if the ball Earth model is true, and that's just one of literally dozens and dozens of examples that are given in books by people like Rowbottom and by Eric Dubai and these other people who've written, Winthrop. These books have been written, some of them 100 years ago, talking about these things, and in school they don't take us through a process of debunking all of the flat Earth theories. All they say is, we live on a ball, here's a globe, never question it, anyone who questions it is crazy. Well, I'm happy to question that, and if that makes me crazy to most people, well, guess what? To me, most people are crazy. Most people still believe that man went to the moon, despite Apollo 17 being utterly laughable, and most people believe that they were put here to work, earn money, shit, sleep, die, and that's it. And they think I'm crazy. That's fine by me. I think they've lost their minds, and I don't think it's their fault. They've been indoctrinated into nonsense, and most of them will never pull themselves out of it. But that's enough for me. It's time for us to wrap up the show. I want to say a huge thanks to everyone in the live chat. We've had 50 people watching live. I'll be happy to do this again next week. And what I like to do with these live shows is to give everyone on the panel a chance to say their final piece, and also to let the listeners know where they can find your work. So I'll start with you there, Dave, the very special guest for episode 1. Do you want to just give us your final words for episode 1 of the Globe Earth Skeptic Roundtable, and then also let the listeners know where they can find your work?
Okay. Well, I'll just finish this with saying that I've been on a bit of a journey of discovery, and literally everything that I've looked at in this journey, from the monetary system to the conspiracy to the law, the free man movement, um, everything I've looked at, I've found the truth behind it. And when I first looked at it, my mindset was, well, this can't be true, and I followed my intuition and found that it turns out to be absolutely true. An example would be the health scam. 4 years ago, I was 20 stone and spiraling down to old age and infirmity. Now, having followed my intuition and used some alternative therapies, I'm now in the best shape of my entire life. That's physical, just based on following this nonsensical information. Now, I get the same feeling about the flat Earth. My spidey sense is letting me know that this is real, and I've not found any evidence to contradict it yet. So you can find my website. It's at www.allegedlydave.com. What I tend to do these days is I travel around helping people for nothing, and using this knowledge of the medical, not medical system, but the alternative health that I've sort of been practicing for the last 4 years. I can help people basically recover from anything. Doesn't matter what it is. So that's me.
Terrific stuff, mate. Well, thanks again for joining us. And like I said, we've got an open invitation for you now from next week, episode 2, and right through to the future. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board. We'll go to you there, Matrix. Any final thoughts for episode 1, and where can people find your work?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's been a good show. I have a channel on YouTube, Matrix Decode. I have some videos there, some different topics, but my last several videos have been about the flat Earth. There's a little bit of comedy in there, and some experiments that I've done. I recommend people checking out, investigating this subject. Seek the truth. And I think there's some good channels on YouTube. I really like Eric Dubé's channel, My Perspective, Stars of Souls, Jeranism. And there's more and more growing, day by day. And I think this subject isn't going to go away. So yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Well, I hope that you'll be back next week as well, Matrix. Again, there is an open invitation for you. And then over to you there, David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. Firstly, a huge thanks, not just for joining us tonight, but for putting the feelers out and organising to get Allegedly Dave, on the show. That was your work, so thank you very much. Any final thoughts for episode 1, and where can people find your work?
Yeah, I just want people to do their own research. This if you listen to the show with an open mind, you should have questions, and you should start, doing your own research. That's what I did. I refused to believe other people. I watch videos and I discern myself whether they're real or not, and drop what I don't like and pay attention to what makes sense. I've compiled a lot of other people's work and some of my own work on deepinsidetherabbithole.com or ditrh.com. If you look at the links at the top, there's one that says, "Is the Earth a round ball?" Go there, check some of them out, especially a short one I made called Quantum Locking, which explains how the sun, the moon, and possibly the planets have been placed in flat circular orbits above us. The stars, as allegedly Dave says, we're not sure what the deal is with them. Are they on a dome? Are they something else? That's fine. I don't claim to know the answer. But the quantumly locked objects orbiting around us makes a lot of sense if you look at it. And also consider the puddle theory, which I'm coining the term, that we live on an endless plane, and there's puddles of life, and this puddle is surrounded by the Antarctic wall that we live in and we call Earth. Earth continues on, and there's other puddles. So just consider that, and just keep looking into it and find a reason to disprove it if you can.
Good stuff, mate. Well, would you guys believe that in the live chat, just as we come towards the end of the show, none other than Eric Dubai himself has made an appearance. So a big hello to Eric, and who knows, maybe we can put the feelers out and try and get him on to one of the future episodes of the Globe Earth Skeptic Roundtable. I had already mentioned earlier in the show that I did purchase a copy of your book, Eric, on PDF, $10, went and printed it off, and I'm about a third of the way through the book, and already there's a number of points that have come up in the book that I'd never even thought of, including the Mississippi River going up a few kilometres if the ball earth model is to be correct. So what we'll have to do is on next week's episode and over future episodes start delving into more of the arguments, because today we touched on NASA being fake, we touched on the lack of curvature, the horizon always rising to eye level, these arguments, and they're good arguments, but they're only some of a whole range of arguments that can be used to argue against the globe earth model, which we'll be doing over future episodes. I want to say one more time another huge thanks to the live chat. For the most part, they were very well behaved. I didn't have to ban anyone from the live chat. There were one or two people causing a bit of mischief, but for the most part it was terrific. Thanks to everyone for their contributions. I hope we read out enough of your objections to satisfy you. In the meantime, between now and next week, feel free to hit me up on Skype, John P. Bono, and if you are an objector, we can get you on the show next week or the week after, and you can play devil's advocate. You can argue for the ball earth. If you have your heart, if you are set on the ball earth model, then by all means come and we'll have a discussion. That's the whole purpose of this show, is to get people around discussing this in a rational, calm manner. I think tonight for a first go, I think it went relatively well, and I for one will be here again at about 10 p.m. Australian time Thursday next week to do this again. I hope David will join me. I hope Dearth will join me. I hope Matrix will be there, and who knows, we might even be able to organise to get someone of the calibre of Eric on the show as well, so stay tuned for that. And for the time being, episode 1 of the Globe Earth Skeptic Roundtable on the 11th of June 2015. We're going to wrap it up right here. Thanks for listening either live or on delay, and hopefully we'll see you guys next time.